And then we have the second half of Prince Caspian. Why don't I see myself on this? Show self view. I don't remember hiding my self view. Maybe I did. Anyways, this book. So we have chapters 9 to 15 to go through. So chapter 9 is what Lucy saw. So my first question for us to discuss a little bit is Lewis seems to put together the sense of physical exhaustion with a frame of mind around going to war. And I just thought it would be good to kind of talk about how those things are related. What is it that Lewis is trying to say? So it's a bit further into the chapter after Lucy tries to wake up the trees.
Dave, what chapter is it? 11?
Chapter 9.
Chapter 9, thanks, sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Vance, I can't find it.
Can't find chapter 9?
I've got chapter.
Okay.
It's a long chapter.
Yes, yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so what's the relationship between the physical condition of the children and the desire or the frame of mind for war? I'm just trying to find it myself.
I'm really glad because I can't.
Well, oh, it's right in the first paragraph. Up till now, the children had only been thinking of how to get to Caspian. Now they wondered what they would do when they found him and how a handful of dwarves and woodland creatures could defeat an army of grown-up humans. So all of that comes out of even Trumpkin longed for the voyage to be over. The seat on which he sat to steer had been made for men, not dwarves, and his feet did not reach the floorboards, and everyone knows how uncomfortable that is, even for 10 minutes. As they all grew more tired, their spirits fell. Sorry, first paragraph of the chapter. Well, just to not dwell on it too much, what I was thinking of is there seems to be some resonance again with screw tape, right? We tend to make compartments in our mind. There's the physical and there's the spiritual. And for the most part, they're wholly unrelated, right? I do physical tasks or I do spiritual tasks. But for Lewis, because we are integrated wholes, and I agree with Lewis here, the physical and the spiritual are interrelated. And so, the children start off with Trumpkin the dwarf going to Caspian's aid, and they have confidence in what they're doing. They have a plan and they're going to go. But as they get tired and they start to get grumbly, they also start to question this confidence. What are we doing? How is this going to be any help? And so just to recognize in our own formative process that there is a relationship between our physical well-being and our spiritual well-being. You know, often we struggle spiritually, and we think spiritual problems have spiritual solutions, and it's not that they don't, but there may also be some connectedness to our physical reality. And so taking care of ourselves physically is a part of good spiritual health as well. What did you think of Lucy's wakefulness and the tree's sleepiness? Lucy lays down with everybody, can't fall asleep, seems to be getting more awake, and she goes walking under the stars into the woods. She has maybe a feeling that she can wake them, and so calls out to them and doesn't quite get them. Has a sense that they were on the verge, but she maybe just timed it wrong, or didn't started too soon, finished too late, missed a key word, something. And communion with the trees remains elusive.
Well, it's sort of the unfolding of this chapter and the next few, as they're moving back and forth between being children
Mhm.
and being their roles of Narnia of old,
Okay.
and of Narnia being what it currently is, but remembering what their past had been.
Mhm.
So it suggests to me that Narnia is going to come back. They're going to be able to some way, or at least get into a new Narnia that is going to have something of what they loved.
So there's some relationship between the almost waking of the trees and the waking or renewal of Narnia itself.
I think so, yeah.
It's interesting. Okay. Again, we don't need to dwell on it. I just, it's a significant part of the chapter. Lewis put it there for some reason. So just want to make sure that we're reading it. So, that's the worst of the girls, said Edmund to Peter and the dwarf. They never carry a map in their heads. That's because our heads have something inside them, said Lucy. So we've talked a little bit about Lewis being a product of his age. We've talked about some of the thinner characters, female characters that he's had. He tends to stick to his more robust characters seem to be male. Although, so we do have this kind of a thing. Now, this is not necessarily Lewis. He may just be trying to mimic kind of sibling arguments. He may be trying to just simply reflect some of the views of his day, but it's here. But we don't want to be too hard on him, because at the same time, he also puts the retorts in. So maybe he really does believe girls can't carry maps in their heads. Neither can I. And that is a strictly masculine characteristic. I don't know why it would be. But at the same time, there's some bite back. Girls have something else in their heads. So
And I think too, overall, in the books that we've read so far of the Chronicles of Narnia, Lucy really is I would call her a robust character.
yes, I agreed. And of course she's named after his goddaughter, for whom The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was written. So
Yes.
it does make sense, but you're right.
Mhm.
She is a good, robust character. And she
Even
continues.
in this book. You know, she's the one who sees Aslan.
Yeah,
She's the one who wants to respond.
yes. She attempts to wake up the trees.
Yeah.
So
Did she
that
find the chest, the little chessman? Did she find a piece?
was Susan found that
Oh.
near the well. So we have this little scene now of a bear breaking through, trying to eat Lucy, and the dwarf, the dear little friend DLF, shoots the bear dead. And it is clearly a wild bear, not a talking bear. And they have some discussion. And part of the discussion is so many of the talking animals have just become wild, become like the dumb animals, dumb in the sense of can't talk, not dumb as in stupid. And then Lucy has this idea as the bear is being butchered for meat. She and Susan go off, and Lucy just kind of has this uncanny thought. Imagine if there's parallels between Narnia and our world, might there then be men who are men? And that's again, Lewis is using that in a general men and women sense, humankind. Might there be humans who go wild on the inside, lose their manness, in some ways we could say, if we were going to use the language, could they lose the image of God? Could they become just like the animals, or merely an animal, since Lewis is also responding to a developing theory of evolution in his day? Any thoughts around that idea that Lucy has?
I think it's an idea that's kicking around, has been kicking around for a long time in literature.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certain situations that come to my mind. I'm thinking about, and I'm very vague about any of the details, but about a story of some people who were in an airplane crash. I think it was in South America, and they eventually ended up eating each other.
Featured in the movie Alive. It was a soccer team, yeah.
Okay, so
In the Andes.
yeah, and then there's a book about kids get
Oh,
abandoned.
the one where they
the
killed
flies.
Piggy.
Yeah, when they
Yeah.
start killing each
Yeah,
other.
Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies.
Yeah.
So I think when I think about that, the book one seemed to be more of a breakdown of your humanity.
Yeah.
And I think probably in the real situations, either things are going on at the same time.
Yeah.
There's some sort of survival instincts. But then again, that's very much like animals.
Yes.
I think it's good for us to remember that we're really close.
Yep. Yeah. And of course, this is rooting into books like Metamorphosis by Ovid. There's a relationship between the gods, humanity, and often one of the punishments will be metamorphosis into an animal. We see that in this book. Some boys a little later are so much like pigs that they are just pigs. Yeah, so he's definitely tapping into that. And even some of the things that you have kind of described, we do recognize that our humanness seems to be, it can be effaced. We can descend to just a brutal, animalistic lack of humanity. And, we can look human on the outside, but be merely animalistic on the inside. It's good to keep in mind.
So what is it that would be with you in your humanness that would not be with you in your animal state? Is it as simple as lack of emotion
Well,
or going more on
if
instinct?
we were to go back to mere Christianity, it would be the effacement of that moral law, that we would so sear our conscience that we would no longer care about our relationship with others or with God.
Yeah,
And-
that's what I was thinking about. I mean, I, since COVID started watching the news most nights, which I hadn't done for years because I didn't want to hear all that bad news. And it hasn't changed a lot. And in Toronto, in the last 2 weeks, there's been, I may get the numbers wrong, but it's like 2 shootings and a stabbing in our high schools
Mm,
in 2 weeks.
yeah,
And I think about gangs and young men and women joining gangs, and I think that's what they have to do
Mhm.
to be in those environments, is they have to sear their conscience, like you said, and just tune all that out. They can't afford to care about anything
yes.
or anybody else except themselves.
Well,
Dave, I was gonna add to like what she's mentioning. I'm thinking of like Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like
yes.
the bare basic of need before we can have belonging or connection. There's that
Mhm.
bare basic needs.
Yes.
I had a friend of mine, and when she talks about working with students in particular, when their behavior is erratic and unrational, we really have to get them out of the basement of their brain.
Yeah.
So it's really like giving them something to eat, getting
Yes.
them to drink through a straw, giving them space, right? Because they kind of are like a cat in a corner.
Yeah.
And that's what I kind of think of in this way, right? And I think there's so often times where people in society, just those basic needs are not being met.
Mhm.
And that's what I was thinking of when she was mentioning like shootings and so forth. Like that sense of belonging is further up the
Yes.
scale too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, no, those are good observations. So Lucy sees Aslan. Did you see Aslan as you read chapter 9?
All over,
Sorry,
all over.
in chapter 9?
I think he really
Point read
comes.
to me where you saw Aslan.
Maybe it wasn't chapter.
Yeah, later you see Aslan.
It's when she's talking to the trees. I don't know. Go on and I'll find it.
Sure. So on page 110 in my book. Look, 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 cried Lucy. Where? What? Said everyone. The lion, said Lucy. Aslan himself. Didn't you see? Her face had changed completely and her eyes shone. Do you really mean? Began Peter. Where did you think you saw him? Asked Susan. Don't talk like a grown-up, said Lucy, stamping her foot. I didn't think I saw him. I saw him. And it goes on. I just wanted to draw out that you should not have seen Aslan in that chapter because Lewis gives no description of Aslan himself. All you get is Lucy's perspective and the other children receiving Lucy's account.
However, Lucy exhibits a couple of fundamental changes
Yeah.
that indicate the validity of his presence.
Oh, yes.
Even though
Yeah.
she hasn't.
Yes. But that's not seeing Aslan. So
Well, it's
you
seeing
haven't
the-
seen Aslan.
No, but you've seen the effect of us.
Yes.
And I certainly think the effect of Aslan just grows and grows as they go.
Yes. But my base thing from a literary perspective is for us to realize we also didn't see Aslan. So I think Lewis is doing that on purpose so that we have some questions. Now, you're right. You get to see the same thing the other children got to see, a visible change and Lucy. We also have the whole conversation with Professor Kirk from the last adventure. Who's more truthful? Why should she be crazy? She's not acting like a crazy person. Either she's lying or she's telling the truth. And she tends to be truthful. And we have the entire former thing. And so here we come to a test, not just the children, we come to a test.
Hmm,
Did Lucy see Aslan?
absolutely.
Of course.
So we're ready to believe. And of course, we have the advantage that we have the whole story all at once. Whereas, of course, if we were in there, it would be unfolding. And maybe
But
things are.
even like Ed, I would hope that I would be like Edmund,
Mhm.
who in the next page or two
Yes,
says, you know, when we first it was Lucy who discovered it first, and none of us believed her.
right.
So he's going to vote for going up.
That's a really good point. So what's going on with Edmund? Why, when everybody else, all that pressure, the older children and this older adult dwarf, no idea what you're talking about. Why would we ever go that way? Why does Edmund side with Lucy? Even though he
Because he-
himself cannot see Aslan.
Because he didn't believe her before, and actually worse than that, knew that Narnia existed because he'd been there and
Mm.
lied about it.
Okay.
And he had to go through that whole process of facing that he'd made those decisions and done those things, as well as aligning himself with the White Witch before Iceland. So I think there was a fundamental change in him.
Yeah. Okay. So then the question becomes, what virtue is Edmund practicing that we are being commended?
And it's hard to identify a virtue. I've come up with integrity, empathy. I don't know if it's any of those things.
Ben might have an answer.
Humility?
Humility, for sure. I see some humility here. Willingness to be wrong. What about faith?
Well, that's a good one.
So, he's not just credulous. It's not that he just now believes anything that, he's not just ready to swallow anything that anybody might come along with. But he's practiced. We saw earlier in the book, he has some discernment around magic. Yeah, he has this history, this experience from the last time. I think he is displaying faith. He's being faithful to who Lucy is. And part of that is the relationship, right? Lucy has been faithful and she has been truthful, and that character has been consistent. So that now Edmund doesn't have to second guess or question. He's free to believe her.
It's interesting the word he chooses, though. It was Lucy who discovered it first, and none of us would believe her. Yet she was right after all. So wouldn't it be fair to believe her this time?
Mhm.
Like it's some sort of not exactly morality, but some sort of a
Yeah,
last time we didn't believe her and she was right. So this time we should believe her, presumably, even if she isn't right, because that all balances out fairness.
yeah. Which of course could be a language and time division. Like again, Lewis may be just trying to work in what young people of his day may have sounded like, or he thought he sounded like. Wouldn't it be fair? But the point is, of course, we've been down this road before. And it seems to me that the way forward is to take Lucy at her word and to follow along. But again, this is a reminder for us, right? As we interact with each other, character, how do we interact as a community? And then also discernment. This is a discerning thing. Aslan doesn't just appear to everybody. Sometimes only one person gets to see Aslan. Well, they decide to go with the High King and work their way down rather than up. And Lucy follows along with tears in her eyes. Which takes us to chapter 10, the return of the lion. So Trumpkin, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy make a decision to go down rather than up. They have a goal. They know how to meet that goal, and they're doing it. What's important for us to note here is that there is a difference between being able to do something and that actually being the best course of action. In my own experience, and maybe in yours too, God doesn't seem often to be all that interested in me traveling in the shortest possible line between point A and point B. I don't know what your experience is, but I have found there's often quite a bit of zigzagging, me taking off in my own direction, thinking I know the way, and then having to retrace steps and that kind of thing. So I think that Lewis, in some ways, wants to raise this and be careful that we don't become too focused on our own goals and our own resources. Did you guys have something you wanted to add there?
It's interesting to add to that, and not everybody always gets to see Aslan, that this also happens in community. And I think of like our church communities, family communities, like how that plays out, and Lucy stays with him, doesn't go on her own.
Yes.
But how that creates dynamics, challenges, like you say, that when the rest of the group is sitting there looking, well, it's easy, like here's the plan.
Yes. And what you're suggesting is nonsense, right? I mean, a literal use of the word nonsense. We need to go down and meet Caspian at Aslan's house. We know where it is. We know how to get there. Yes, there's some challenges with this, but a little hard work. We can get there. And your plan is to follow an invisible lion, which we're not 100% sure you actually saw, and you want to go up. I mean, that's the complete opposite direction of where we want to go. I mean, there seems to be no logic. How could we possibly go that way and get to where we need to be? A lot of pressures. And then, I mean, we have the added reality that this is a group of children primarily, and she is the youngest. And Carol was saying on the way over here tonight, for youngest often does not get heard all that well. So we do have power dynamics moving in here as well.
There's also a spiritual dimension to it, I think. Because sometimes if you're given a particular gift and you have it and you're willing to use it, but when you use it, no one else believes that you have it. And so even though in a situation you have what you know is the right way to go, or the best answer, or the best choice, or whatever it is, and no one believes you, and then eventually somewhere down the line it turns out, oh yeah, you were right after all. And one time it's annoying, but when it happens over and over and over again, you start saying to the Lord, well, what have you given me this gift for? Because all I do is fight with people about having it. It never seems to serve any useful purpose.
Mm.
And I think that's something of what Lucy's dealing with, because she
Right.
has this sensitivity to things spiritual, or Aslan and the trees, or whatever it is.
Yes. Well, and I mean, that kind of echoes, you know, a prophet is without honor in their own hometown kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yes, seems to be a part and parcel with that for sure. Yeah. Well, they do make it down, and almost immediately they are met with arrows flying at them. They have to crawl as quickly as they can back up. And then Lucy wakes from the deepest sleep because she had a feeling that the voice that she liked best in the world called her name. And then we see Aslan because he calls her. And so when she sees Aslan, she trembles, and Lewis says she trembled with excitement and not fear. And I thought, why is that important? Why is the fact that she trembled with excitement and not fear important?
Isn't the most common biblical reaction? Like I think of Isaiah and stuff, fear and falling
Yes.
down.
Yes. Yes, it is. So that biblical fear, that's fear, right? Not just excitement. So when you noted that, what were you trying to draw out, Ben?
Why the contrast? Why did he pick differently?
Mhm.
The experience? It's not the first time.
Certainly, there's that.
And she's had experience with Aslan, like she knows that there's nothing to fear.
Okay, yeah. Yep. So one of the things, one of the ways that John Wesley would put things is that in this process of salvation through Christ, we move from a servile fear to a sonship fear, or son and daughter fear. And those two fear are different. Now, often what we see in scripture is people coming face to face with the presence of God, which is terrifying, because you will die, right? To come face to face with God, fully unveiled, like think of Moses, who desires to see God and says, you can see me from behind. Think of Elijah, who hides his face on the mountain, right? Like, to actually see God is to die. And that's why in the New Testament it says no one has ever seen God except the one and only God, the Son, meaning Jesus. So as Jesus takes on human form, though, we're able to look on the face of God without fear of that otherness and that sudden death. And so there is a humanization, if you will, that changes in the new covenant. And so because of that, So the fear of God in the Old Testament always involves a love of God. I mean, 98% of that is a love of God, 2% a real fear to keep the other 98% honest. But there does seem to be something that changes with the person of Jesus and the way that we respond. It's no longer like that unknown God revealing himself, where he just might break out at any moment. Rather, there's something far more human and accessible. And then, of course, there's also part of the history, the death and the resurrection of both Christ and Aslan. So we know he's still not a tame lion, and yet we know him well enough to know that he loves us. And rather than wounding us, he took wounds for us. So I think that's part of the difference. And again, this is the voice that she likes best, right? So this is, again, part of the way that Lewis wants to describe this, what we saw in Screw Tape Letters. Everything about us is directed heavenward, is in God's favor. Like, we desire this life, we desire him. Augustine would say, our hearts are restless until they find rest in thee, O Lord. And so there's also this sense of the longing that we have inbuilt into us that is fulfilled when we come face to face with Aslan. So Carol had said in the last chapter, we're going to see the theme of the trees awakening and Narnia's renewal as these children become more of their Narnian selves. She was dead on. And I think we see it here, where the trees are awakening, not fully awakened yet, and Aslan's mission for the children. And so I think it's a reflection of Romans 8. So in Romans 8, the Apostle Paul says, the entire creation itself is longing for, or is on tiptoes in excitement, is kind of the word picture Paul uses there. It is on tiptoes in anticipation of the revelation of the sons of God, plural, not singular, sons of God, which is you and I, because there is a link, as we are the image bearers, stewards over creation, as we are redeemed, creation itself is going to be redeemed. And so there's this relationship here in Narnia as well, right? As the children come and as Caspian is getting closer to being put on the throne, the damage done by these other humans that submerge the spirits of the trees and the waters deep into themselves, into this slumber and sleep. They're beginning to awaken and anticipate this mission. We also have echoing of the language of the Psalms, right? The trees and the mountains wave their arms and bend in worship of the living God. Like, they clap their hands. So there's something, again, about the living creation. You know, it is
It's almost like they're also responding to Aslan.
right. Yeah, very much so. And
So when the trees were sort of almost waking up before, when she was awake, he was probably somewhere nearby.
Yes. Well, and And in the same way that he wakes her up by calling her name, so he wakes up the rest of creation. Why does, this one's for Natasha, why does Aslan grow bigger when we grow bigger?
Probably because our knowledge and our wisdom is also growing.
Mhm.
Something like that.
It's the reverse of what you think,
Okay,
because almost everything is bigger when you're small, and as you grow up and you go back and look at it, it looks way smaller than it had when you were a kid.
Mhm.
But in this one, it's doing the reverse of that. But I think Natasha's absolutely right. I think it's just that you have growing understanding of the Lord,
so greater capacity.
so that you can understand more. But it is the reverse of the natural order.
Mhm. Yeah. So I agree with you, there's capacity, knowledge, understanding, and I think love too.
Mm.
I was
Again,
thinking, Dave, the other thing I was thinking of is just like the idea of the gospel message of knowing more about our sinfulness and how
yes,
far we are from
Yes.
God.
yes,
We grow that way and he grows even bigger. So then the cross becomes bigger because we're in such need of it more so.
okay,
And for the baby stages of our faith, yes, we've accepted Jesus in our heart. Now we're going to heaven. But as we grow, we realize just how far we are, how sinful we are, and
Mhm.
how much need we are of his forgiveness, faithfulness, and love. So I sort of see that as the growth, like we learn more about ourselves and we grow in our understanding, same as what Tash said.
Yeah.
But then it grows how much more we need him.
Yes. So you're quite right. In theology, you'll see even like somebody like John Calvin in his Institutes of the Christian Religion, love of God and love of self go hand in hand. And so they're interrelated. As we love God, we grow in ourselves. As we love ourselves, we grow in our love for God. And that goes for understanding all that. So you're quite right. There is this interrelated dynamic that's going on. Yeah, those are all great. And it also echoes that further up and further in that we've seen maybe, we have seen a little bit in terms of the entrance into Narnia, the entire country within the wardrobe, right? So that ever expanding from something small to something much larger. We'll see that theme again and again in a few other places. And so we're kind of pointing to that reality that there is always going to be, so we're going to have eternity with God, right? And from a secular cultural point of view, that is torment for most people if you stop and think about it. Like you just run out of things to do, you'll be bored, it'll be awful after a few short years, and here you have eternity. But the reality is there will always be more of God than our ability to comprehend, even in eternity. We will never plumb the depths of who God is, which means we will never plumb the depths of our capacity to love God. We'll keep growing. And so we will never be bored because we will always be exploring God further and further and entering into his life more and more.
Yeah, I like that. I also like there's that idea of mystery that we'll never fully understand or fully comprehend.
Right.
Yeah, but there's this constant joy or constant need to want to find out more about a little bit more of the mystery of Christ, right?
Yes. 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 So there we get into, I think I've talked about it before in Catholicism, the beatific vision. Um, uh, we will see him as he sees us, or we will see him as we are seen. For the reformers like Calvin and Luther, knowledge was a big thing. So we will know God as he knows us. And for Wesley, it's love. We will love God as God loves us. And again, we don't need to set those things against each other. To see, to know, and to love God, I think is all of one at the end of it. So now we have a conversation between Lucy and Aslan. So I've phrased my question this way. What is this process that Aslan and Lucy go through, and why is it important? So she sees, she hugs, they fall over. We may lose Carol.
Before I've lost it completely, the thing that I want to say about this is that this is in fact the human journey. When you first meet God and he comes into your life and everything is wonderful. And Lucy says, I was so pleased with finding you again. And I thought you'd like to stay. And I thought you'd brought them roaring and frighten all the enemies away. And now everything is going to be hard. So when the honeymoon of faith is over, the reality of the hardness of life in Christ sets in. And God's going to ask you to do things that seem to be far beyond your power. And expect you to be a whole lot more than you are.
Okay. So you're kind of moving a little bit ahead of me. Before the mission, there's some interpersonal work between Aslan and Lucy that has to happen.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, she saw him and she knew that he wanted them to go up and follow him. And even when the others didn't, she should have stayed the course by herself.
Yeah. Again, we may have the advantage of being outside the story, right?
Well, again, it's kind of like what Carol said. You know, it's getting hard.
Yeah.
Now I got to make the difficult choices.
Yeah. So we have this line, much time has been lost today. Yes. Wasn't it a shame, said Lucy. I saw you all right. They wouldn't believe me. They're also, from somewhere deep inside Aslan's body, there came the faintest suggestion of a growl. I'm sorry, said Lucy, who understood some of his moods. I didn't mean to start slanging the others, but it wasn't my fault anyway, was it? The lion looked straight into her eyes. Oh, Aslan, said Lucy. You don't mean it was. How could I? I couldn't have left the others and come up to you alone. How could I? Don't look at me like that. Oh, well, I suppose I could. Yes, and it wouldn't have been alone, I know, not if I was with you. But what would have been the good? So just let's name this process. What is this that's going on? I mean, Aslan isn't saying much. We got the faintest suggestion of a growl and then a look straight into her eyes. So she's doing the talking. Go ahead, Tina.
In our business world, we would call this very good coaching.
Okay. Well, unpack it that way for us then.
Letting people, people have the resources within them and how to proceed. Generally, people know the answers.
Okay,
And
so
then have to
cast
have the-
that into Lucy's situation for us. How would you describe what's going on with Lucy?
Lucy knew what faith looks like and chose not to trust, chose not to act in that moment.
Okay. So first of all, where does Lucy initially put responsibility for things?
Others.
Others. Now, that seemed to solicit the faintest suggestion of a growl from Aslan. Why would that happen? What's the problem? Is Lucy right in thinking Aslan is unhappy with her slanging off the others? Or has she missed the point?
No, he's definitely upset about that because it's not our place to judge others, but to judge ourselves, look at ourselves.
Well, in terms of who could have taken the action from that past event, who could have taken the action in that?
Lucy,
Why?
because she saw him.
She was the only one who really knew that he was there and what he desired of her, making her responsible. Natasha.
So, in some ways, people are responsible for their own call, right? Following through with it on their own, not, using others around them as excuses for not doing stuff, but it's between you and God, your relationship, your call.
Yep. So an illustration, when I was pastoring that little church in Muskoka so many years ago, and I wanted them to do a prayer walk into town, and they just wanted to do a prayer walk around the church. I had this mental process that I was going through where I thought, oh, I wish that they had just gone along with me and done it. And I would say, I heard the voice of the Spirit say to me, well, what about you?
Mm.
It seemed that the whole thing was called off because they had a different vision. They wouldn't do it this way. And instead of being focused on them and why it was a failure, question came, what about you? So she apologizes for slanging the others, but she doesn't take responsibility until he looks into her eyes, and then she begins to come face to face with her responsibility. So I think part of the process that I want us to see is that we as human beings are, one, really good about lying to ourselves. Lucy, when she starts, is convinced that the problem in the situation was the other children. They were older, they called the shots, they wouldn't come with her. In her mind, they had failed. And what she comes face to face with is that those are excuses and justifications. I mean, it's all true. They wouldn't. That was the situation she was faced with. But even within that situation, there's still a right way to act. And she should have done it, come what may. And in that case, we're back to where Carol started us off. Yeah, it's harder. And maybe that's why we have the conversation about you are bigger and Aslan's bigger before this interchange. to recognize that as we grow, not only does Aslan become bigger, but his expectations for us becomes bigger as well.
Hmm.
We carry more weight of responsibility as we leave that childhood behind. When I was a child, and then I put away childish things. Well, so I think it's important. I think that that is one of the things that happens is we are filled with self-deceit, and part of the process that we go through as we do this faith formation of discipleship is Jesus confronts our self-deception. He confronts our lies. He confronts our evasions. He confronts our blaming of others and our shifting responsibility. And he wants to just keep bringing it back to, no, I'm talking about you and me. What about you?
Hmm.
And I do think that there's this fantastic image on 125 where Lucy buried her head in his mane to
Yeah.
hide from his face.
Hmm.
There's also that image there of comfort, right? Like he is, just this fantastic, beautiful vision that you must get when you read this.
Yeah.
There must have been magic in his mane. She could feel lion strength going into her.
Yeah.
Isn't that fantastic?
Now you are a lioness.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that is a really important image.
Is it all on her shoulders? Because he says, now you're a lioness, and now all Narnia will be renewed. So is the renewal of Narnia sitting on Lucy's shoulders?
Seems to be. Which tells us the weightiness. I think it's really important too to recognize in this conversation. You mean that it would have turned out all right somehow, but how? Please, Aslan, am I not to know? To know what would have happened, child? Said Aslan. No, nobody has ever told that.
No. I wonder that sometimes about my own life.
So, what is Lewis describing here? What's caution? What's the lesson? Kind of reminds me of the first Harry Potter book and the Mirror of Erised, which is the mirror image of the word desire. Just in case you didn't know. But Harry keeps coming back to this mirror night after night because when he stands in front of it, he's able to see his whole family. Having grown up an orphan and unloved by the little family that he had left. So again, Lewis has told us through Uncle Screwtape that the past is the furthest away from eternity, right? The present moment touches eternity, and we're not to be too caught up with the future, and the past is frozen. It's fixed.
Mm.
And so, kind of like Dumbledore says that Harry, it does not do to dwell on the past. It will not do anything for you. It won't give you any education. It won't make you feel better. That desire of the past will just leave you as frozen as it is. But I can tell you what will happen if, says Aslan. And so here again, we have that moment of where eternity touches is in this present moment. And to me, that is freedom. There's no regret in that. and it's hopeful for me because no matter what, no matter how muddled or mucked up, we kept going down instead of going up. If we will stop right now and follow now, God can redeem the situation. Definitely, it will look different than it might have looked then. But again, we have no access to that.
It's kind of
The
like a
promise
GPS.
is now. Sorry. go
It's
ahead.
like your GPS.
Yeah,
Like if you're following your GPS, which I have absolutely no ability to do, so this may not work out right. But it seems to me that when you're following and you turn wrong, the voice doesn't say, "Oh, you stupid idiot." The
right.
voice just recalculates and
Rerouting or
yeah,
tells you to do a U-turn.
turn or like it just there's no punishment. There's no this is going to take you 3 minutes longer now. Any the way your wife or
Yep.
people sitting in the car might do. It just recalculates and makes the
Yes.
best of it. Just
And there may be
constantly.
some natural consequences, like in your example, you might get there late because you didn't follow the instructions. Something might happen
Yeah.
as a result.
But the
these
machine is
situations.
not
Yeah,
doing it to you.
yeah.
It's not judging
Although we
you.
probably want to be careful that we don't relate a machine to God too closely.
No,
But I think your point is taken. Yeah. It reminded me of in Mere Christianity, Lewis says as he's kind of logically working through things, are we really back to this superstition of Christianity? Didn't we already get away from that? And he says, well, if you are going the wrong way, then the best thing you can do is not to just keep moving forward because you'll never get to where you need to go that way, but is actually come face to face with the fact that you went the wrong way, retrace your steps back and start again. And if it was a sum, mathematical sum, you have to go back to the beginning of the proposition and you have to start to work through it again. You can't just have an error in there and keep building on that error. You will never get to the correct answer that way.
that's what the children say
Right.
back a bit when they're deciding whether they're going up or down.
Yep. Yep.
I think it's significant too, that one little sentence that he says, and now all Narnia will be renewed. Now it'll be renewed,
Mhm.
not in the 126 pages before this. It's now. Why is it now? What just happened to make it now?
What page are you on?
Pardon?
She said, I'm ready now. It's just after she buries her head in his mane.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Oh.
See,
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
stuck
sorry,
on that
Aslan, she
image.
said, I'm ready now. And then he
Yeah.
says, now you're a lioness.
Yes.
126.
Yeah.
And now all Narnia will be renewed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, biblically, there's in the New Testament, there's two words for time. There's the chronological time, chronos, and there's the kairotic time, kairos, which the difference is there's the chronological is that moment by moment, but then there's this other time, which is the significant time or event of God. So a significant time and event in the New Testament context that is usually with God. So you could think, you were this, but now you are this, right? It's that moment of time. And so this is prophetic to some degree. And it hinges. So a moment ago, we said, is this all on Lucy? And I said, yes, but we could also say, no, it's actually all on Aslan, but it's this cooperative grace, right? So it's because Lucy is ready to follow and to do what she needs to do, no matter what, that things will go right and Aslan will work out his purposes through her. So, I mean, it's Aslan that ultimately puts all things right. but it also does need the cooperation of Lucy. And so we need to keep that. That's a very Wesleyan concept, right? That cooperative grace that God chooses to work through us most of the time. His grace is mediated through his representatives, through his image bearers. And
Yeah,
that's why
what he said.
But she can only be ready because of him. She can't get ready apart from him.
right.
She has to have his mane to bear her face
Yeah.
in. That's her strength. That's when the
And
strength
yet
gets into her.
it's not, it is a real question, right? Are you ready now? So she has the option of saying no. So again, this grace, and this is where it's going to push towards a more Wesleyan theology than a Calvinistic theology. This grace does not overpower us. We don't become automatons, right? He calls her name, she wakes, she responds, she moves. So there's the awakening grace, and there's the prevenient grace before that, right? Which enables her to hear. So the very fact that God speaks is part of prevenient grace. And then there's awakening grace. So she hears, she awakes to it, she pursues it. And then as she responds to him, she could have, in that conversation, kept saying, no, it was them. No, they wouldn't listen, right? Who knows what would have happened in that moment? Would Aslan have faded? Would Aslan have taken another tack? We don't get to know what would have happened. We only know what does happen as a result of Lucy's willingness to be brave, to follow after Aslan. And yes, as she does that seemingly simultaneously, he is also empowering her and enabling her to do the very thing that he's calling her to do. But he still recognizes that this is a really hard thing for her. It's as hard as what's been going on for Narnia for a very long time. This is all good, guys. This is good conversation. That was 8:17. I thought that we would spend most of our time in these two chapters because I think they're really the heart of the whole book. And then things don't happen the same way twice. As Carol said earlier, I thought that you would come in and be strong and destroy our enemies, right? Despite the conversation that occurs later, it isn't the children that kill or deal with the White Witch. It is Aslan who swallows her whole, right? And so Lucy thought it was going to be like last time, but he says, I'm sorry, but things never happen the same way twice. So, I mean, that's pretty definite. Things never happen the same way twice. So they don't get into Narnia the same way twice, and Aslan is not going to behave the same way twice. Go ahead.
I love the last sentence in the chapter.
Okay.
Edmund says, I do wish you wouldn't keep on seeing things. When you've lived with a prophetic person, you can really wish they didn't keep on seeing things.
Mhm. Yes, there's a cost. Sleep is a cost. So talk about this, things don't happen the same way twice. Why is that?
I can't think of when they do happen the same way twice.
That's fine. Now we're asking why. Oh, if Isaiah has something to share, we are not hearing him. Tina is unmuting.
No, he doesn't have anything to share.
Okay. Okay. He's being edited.
Yes.
I saw the gestures. I understood what they meant. Well, let me propose that again, this is part of our growth, right? Why is Aslan so hidden in this book? I mean, the last book, they almost just get into Narnia. Aslan's name is mentioned. They rush right to the stone table. They meet him there. There's a whole plan. They get long, lovely conversations. He's rising from the dead. He's unfreezing statues. He's leading an army. He's eating the White Witch. He's courting kings and queens. I mean, it is just packed with him. And here, it's not until chapter 9, which halfway through the book, and we get a first secondhand glimpse. And then we have Aslan, and then he disappears. Most of this book is sans Aslan. Doesn't happen the same way twice. So again, I think this is part of Lewis's theology. This is how we grow up. We heard it from Uncle Screwtape, right? There is this initial glory, but he backs that away after a while because he desires free creatures who love him. He desires to make us sons and daughters. So this is part of the process. I think the other side is we make idols. You look like you might be unmuting. No, okay. We make idols of things, right? So if that wardrobe, for example, always gave us access to Narnia, then pretty soon the wardrobe itself would take on a role inappropriate. And so God wants us hungry for him, not settling for the things that seem to give us instant access to him, which is what that was an Israel problem, right? So Thomas Long, who wrote The Witness of Preaching, says one of the reasons why Israel kept going after Baal and Asherah was because there was this promised deliverance. If you pray to these gods, you will get what it is that you pray for. Whereas Yahweh seems to have his own agenda. He seems distant. He seems less accessible. He seems to want to keep control. And so they're always moving towards the idols because it's something that they can control the situation. And so I think that's in part why it never happens the same way twice either. Idols.
It's interesting because we definitely have like a human need and desire like for ritual, and we value and enact, and which is sort of the same, that consistency. And small kids want routine, want traditions, want to wake up and have their cup,
Yeah.
same spot.
Yeah.
Morning and
yeah. And so that's a really interesting observation because of course Lewis is an Anglican who really values the prayer book and the order of service. He sees that this is for him a much better way than an evangelical kind of free type of prayer and movement that these liturgies give us access to God. So there is something in what you say. I would look at it more from the point of view as parents, right? Part of our role as parents is not to just keep things the same and familiar for our kids all the time. We want to move the bar up so that they have to stretch to reach for it. That's part of growth, right? There's no growth if there's no new challenges. And So I think from a Narnia perspective, an Aslan perspective, a Jesus perspective, a spiritual formation perspective, we gravitate to what's safe and comfortable, to what we know. And so those very same routines, which can be helpful, can also begin to transition to a means to escape growth, to escape change, to avoid conflict or challenge. So from a school teacher point of view, imagine only ever giving the kids the ABCs or the 1, 2, 3s, or to only do addition and subtraction, one digit, But in school, once we master something or start to master something, then we move on to the next thing, right? We just need to keep layering in, because we know that it's healthy and important to keep growing that thing.
I think of too, like at the first book and how the structure of Narnia was created right from the start, and
Mhm.
how important humans seem to need structure and a framework to sort of organize our lives. But
Yes.
then you put in different concepts, and some are simple and then some are complicated. And then we start to do comparatives of concepts. And so you begin to build and get messy, if you
Yeah.
will, right? But we still have that framework of the gospel.
Yeah.
And so even though we might not see the lines anymore,
Yeah.
right? Like Aslan, we didn't see him as much in this book,
Yeah.
but he's there,
Yes.
right? And so knowing and having that faithfulness that the lines are there, it's just now we have to puzzle through, how do we maneuver all the pieces within?
Yeah.
Seems to be something that I'm hearing.
Yeah, well, and I think Ben named integrity earlier, right? And integrity is doing what we're supposed to do, even when nobody's watching, but also when it's hard, or without that kind of parental Aslan role hanging right over us, right? I mean, it's the same goal with our children. We have said to our daughters, part of our job as parents is to develop you into healthy, godly, contributing members of society. It's not just to make sure you're alive at the end of 18 years. And it's certainly, I mean, happiness is a part of it, but the goals have to be much larger than that. We need to ready you to do life on your own, to maybe have your own family, to pursue careers, to have the character and the fortitude to do what's right. Yeah, that's all part of it. I really liked what you said about that growing complexity, and all of that is foundationed on that good creation, because that is creation itself is moving from chaos to order, right? That's how life can be established, is God has made the environment conducive to the development of life. It's why when we plant a seed, it grows into a plant, right? Most of the time, if Sarah's not involved. But that is the created order. And the reason why we can continue to build our schema to more and more complex things is all because of the foundational principles that are there, that God has set in that creation. Yeah, for sure. $8.29. Well, again, I really think these two chapters, 9 and 10, were the heart of this book. There are other things to pay attention to. One of the big themes that I think we saw was in Nickabrick and the Black Dwarves. We have this division in Lewis between good and evil, and they're very clear lines, and yet there seems to be, for these dwarves, kind of a third option. And they just want power. power to accomplish their goals. And so, again, we need to remember that not only are there good and right goals, but there are good and right ways to pursue those goals. And that's something that I think Lewis wants to bring to mind. Reminded me of Sirius Black's conversation with Harry about Professor Umbridge. The world is not divided into good people and Death Eaters. There are other forms of evil in the world. And so, you know, it can look different. Certainly the idea of what makes us ready for leadership or to take on power. And there, again, there's a contrast in power within this book. The power Lucy has, seemingly powerlessness, the power Nickabrick desires, the power that old Narnia desires, the power of Aslan, the power of the children, and the power to be king. Yeah. And I love when Caspian says, "I wish I had come from better lineage." The line that Aslan says, "You come from the Lord Adam and the Lady Eve, enough to lift the head of the poorest beggar and to bow the head of the greatest king or emperor." I think that's a really important thing for us to think on, because I think sometimes we tend to think in terms of this is good, this is bad. But I think there's often some dualism to these things, or good things and bad things about it. So our lineage. All right, enough for one night. I'm going to stop the recording and then we can pray.